Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the 5 p.m. podcast. I'm Tina, and as always, I'm here with Dan, our resident political enthusiast.
Hey, Tina. Always great to be back. And today, we've got a topic that's, well, it's pretty intense, even for political standards. We're diving into the Canada-US trade relations, specifically in agriculture.
Exactly. It seems like there's some serious tension brewing, with talks of tariffs and trade disputes. But for our listeners who might not be following the details, could you give us a quick overview?
So basically what's happening is, both countries have put in place these reciprocal tariffs, a 25% tax, essentially, on a huge amount of traded goods. We're talking about $155 billion Canadian, or $30 billion US dollars worth of trade. And agriculture is taking a major hit.
Wow, those are massive numbers. But what does it mean times for, the average person? Are we going to see higher prices at the grocery store?
That's a very real possibility. I was just reading a report from Pharmanaut. They're projecting a $7 billion annual reduction in Canadian agricultural exports. And get this, potentially 13,000 job losses.
13,000 jobs, that's significant. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. Those are real people, real families affected. So, what's being done? Are Canadian officials just sitting back and letting this happen?
Not at all. Federal, provincial, and territorial agricultural ministers are meeting, trying to figure this out. They're focusing on what they call supply chain resilience. Basically, how do they keep things moving, keep food on the shelves, despite these trade barriers?
Okay, supply chain resilience. That sounds complicated. Can you break that down for us?
Think of it this way. It's about making sure that even if one route is blocked, there are other ways to get products where they need to go. They're talking about diversifying export markets, finding new customers, not just relying on the U.S. And they're looking at ways to help farmers deal with the increased costs of, well, everything.
So finding new buyers and easing the financial burden on farmers makes sense. But isn't the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA, supposed to prevent this kind of thing?
That's the thing about the USMCA. It does times have provisions for agricultural trade, but it also allows for these kinds of safeguards. It's a balancing act. It tries to maintain open trade, but also gives countries some leeway to protect their own industries in, quote-unquote, exceptional circumstances.
Exceptional circumstances. That's a pretty broad term, isn't it? So basically, either side can use that as a justification for tariffs?
Essentially, yes. And that's where things get tricky and political. It becomes a question of who decides what's exceptional and what's not. It's a delicate dance, to say the least.
A delicate dance with, potentially, huge consequences. We've talked about the economic impact, the job losses. What are the experts saying? What are the people on the ground, the farmers, experiencing?
I came across a quote from Keith Currie, the president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. He said farmers are facing a double pressure. Higher costs for things they need to buy, and times lower prices for what they're selling. He's calling for federal tax bridging measures. Basically, government help to tide them over.
That makes perfect sense. They're getting squeezed from both ends. It's not just about economics. There's a human element here. I mean, these are people's livelihoods.
And it goes beyond just the farmers, too. Think about the impact on rural communities, where agriculture is often the main industry. These job losses could have a ripple effect.
So what about the future? Are we stuck in this cycle of tariffs and trade disputes, or are there any potential solutions on the horizon?
One interesting thing is the push for more technology in agriculture. I've seen reports of a significant increase in the adoption of AI-driven precision agriculture, using technology to make farming more efficient and, hopefully, offset some of these losses.
AI in farming, that sounds futuristic, like something out of a sci-fi movie. How does that work?
It's kind of like, when you use GPS to navigate? Imagine that, but for crops, using sensors, satellites, even drones, to monitor everything. Soil conditions, water levels, even the health of individual plants. It allows farmers to use resources much more precisely, reducing waste and increasing yields.
So using technology to get smarter about farming. It's like a high-tech response to an age-old problem. But can technology really solve a trade war?
It's not a magic bullet, that's for sure. It's one piece of the puzzle. Ultimately, resolving this will likely require a combination of things. Diplomatic efforts, support for farmers, and, yes, maybe even a little bit of technological innovation.
It's a complex issue, with no easy answers. but it's something that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not. Thanks for breaking it down for us, Dan. This has been enlightening, to say the least.
Always a pleasure, Tina. And it's a reminder that these global issues, they're not abstract. They have real-world consequences, and it's important to understand what's at stake.
Well said. And that's all the time we have for today. Join us next time on the 5 p.m. podcast for more deep dives into the issues that matter.